So I'd been yo-yo dieting for years, just like my patients. I would go on a diet and then off a diet. In control, out of control. And they were doing the same thing. They'd get ready for a cruise and go on the cruise. Then they'd come home from the cruise and then they'd go back to work. You know, for a long time, I thought there was something wrong with me. Maybe I just didn't have enough self-discipline. But I managed to make it through medical school. I had a pretty successful medical practice. So I heard the same story over and over again from my patients. They were pretty successful at most of the things they did, except dieting. They couldn't stick to it indefinitely. My husband and my children, on the other hand, never dieted. In fact, they ate whatever they loved. You know, they didn't even think about food unless they were hungry. They didn't seem to really think and worry about food like the rest of us. That awareness that they had retained somehow the instinctive ability to eat what they loved despite our abundant food environment was a real aha for me, a real eye-opener. I realized that my yo-yo dieting was about a disconnection from why I was eating. That was really the missing link for most of us. So as I paid attention to what they were doing, I began to transform my own relationship with food. I stopped dieting, stopped worrying about food so much, started trusting my body, and eventually I used that as the foundation to develop something I call the mindful eating cycle. Now, the mindful eating cycle helps us develop consciousness around the decisions that we make with our eating. Why do I eat? When do I eat? What do I eat? How do I eat? How much do I eat? And where do I invest my energy? So if you think about somebody that you know who eats instinctively, why do they eat? Probably because they need fuel. So when do they feel like eating? Whenever they get hungry. Now, what do they eat? Whatever they want. And we hate that about them, right? So we're thinking and worrying about food all the time, yet they don't seem to really have to worry about it. Maybe all the things that we hear about what's good and bad isn't so clear-cut. Of course, you might think, well, they have a lot of willpower. But since they can eat whatever they want, whenever they want, food doesn't have any power over them. So they don't need willpower to stop eating. Big difference, right? Now, how do they eat? They eat with the intention of feeling better when they're done than they did when they started. It's as if they have a built-in thermostat that keeps their fuel level in a comfortable range. If their fuel level begins to drop, they feel hungry, and that triggers the desire to eat. As they're eating, their fuel level goes back up, and the thermostat tells them, you know, you're about to cross that little invisible line back into discomfort. Have you crossed that line before? So they will stop eating, even if there's perfectly good food on their plate. Apparently their mother didn't know about the starving children, and those kids are still starving, right? And when we clean our plate, we don't help them one little bit. Now, where do they invest their energy? Living their life. They work, they play, but they may or may not exercise. But who's exercise good for? Everybody. Yet, people who eat instinctively may or may not be getting the exercise that they need to be healthy. Now, the good news is that every single one of us was born with the instinctive ability to eat this way. The bad news is many of us have forgotten how. So when you think about those of us who've struggled with eating or overeating, why do we eat? Primarily for triggers. Does the name Pavlov ring a bell? So we eat for physical triggers like thirst or fatigue. We eat for environmental triggers, the presence of food, food we've paid for, free food, which is kind of funny, isn't it? If you paid for it, you have to eat it all, but if it's free, you have to eat it all. We eat for emotional reasons too. We eat when we're stressed. We eat when we're bored. We eat when we're mad. We eat when we're sad. We eat when we're celebrating. We eat when we're rewarding ourselves. We basically eat for every emotion. So isn't it interesting that in this current food abundant environment that people would struggle with food when they're so disconnected from the real reason that they need food in the first place? Now, the question is, if you're eating because you're sad, mad, glad, stressed, or bored, or because you see food or there's free food, when do you feel like eating? All the time. All the time. And what do you feel like eating? See, that's when I like to throw a little 3-ounce piece of salmon on the grill. No? No. Broccoli? What do you eat? Chocolate? You eat chocolate? Potato chips? Pizza? Brownies? Hamburgers? Beer? Right? Why you want to eat will affect what you eat. That's the missing link for so many of us. Now, how do you eat when you're overeating? Fast, as though we have something more important to do than to eat. We eat leaning over the sink or standing in front of the freezer with ice cream. Here's a good idea for portion control. If your feet start getting cold, it's time to shut the door. Right? So we eat when we're distracted. We eat while we're working, while we're talking, while we're watching TV, while we're reading. But this idea of multitasking is a myth. You can only fully focus on one thing at a time. You eat about 1,500 snacks and meals a year, so chances are pretty good that eating goes on autopilot, don't you think? So we will eat until the plate is clean, till the food is gone, till we feel miserable, until the row of Oreos is even. Yeah. Now, what does your body do with fuel that it didn't ask for? It stores it. Of course it does. And that's not the problem. The problem is that eating cannot meet your other needs very well. So if you eat when you're bored, that gives you something to do, except when you stop, you're bored again. So you have to eat again. Again, in this abundant food culture, we can lose the ability to know when we've had enough. Now, when you get into this cycle, the only way out feels like going on a diet. So think about this eating cycle when you are dieting. Why are you eating? According to the rules. You eat when the rules tell you. So what are some of the rules about when you should eat? You have to eat breakfast because breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And it is. Unless you've been eating all night, and then it's not that important. Rules will tell us that you can't eat after 7 o'clock at night, right? Now, I learned that one in medical school because your metabolism shuts off at 7:01. What's that rule really about? Really designed to control our eating that occurs in front of the TV or when we're bored or when we're rewarding ourselves for getting through another busy day. So when you go off the diet, you don't have to follow that rule anymore. So you go right back to doing what you were doing before. Ultimately, diets don't work because they're an external rule that you never internalize. Now, when you're on a diet, what are you supposed to eat? The celery. Kind of depends on the decade, right? It's a roving target, what's good to eat right now. Now, the truth is that what really happens with that is that when you restrict yourself from certain foods, you begin to crave those foods even more. We basically end up turning healthy eating into a 4-letter word. So if I'm craving certain foods because I feel deprived, then when I finally give in, I may overeat those foods. I tweeted once, how many rice cakes does it take to satisfy a craving for chocolate? She says 6. My favorite answer was 7 and a Snickers bar. So when we're eating for other reasons, when we're dieting, we begin to feel deprived of the foods that we love. We then finally overeat them and then feel guilty, and that leads to more overeating. What I call the eat, repent, repeat cycle. So, how do you eat when you're on a diet? I think a lot of people over-diet the same way they overeat. They're still thinking and talking about food all the time. So, how much do they eat? Well, they weigh, they measure, they count, they write everything down. You know there's an app for that now. So we get to this place where we're investing all of our energy in food and thinking about food. What about exercise? Dieting turns exercise into punishment for eating. You exercise to pay penance when you were bad. You exercise to earn the right to eat. So in my office, they would come in and say, oh, I know I should exercise, but I hate it. So here we are, caught in this cycle again. Most people don't have enough time, energy, or willpower to stick to a diet indefinitely. So they go on their diet, off their diet, in control, out of control. You know, I read a study, recent study. They surveyed 14,000 people about their weight history. And based on this study, what we found out is that 1 in 6 people have lost weight and been able to keep off maybe 10% of their body weight for 1 year or more. 1 in 6. As a physician, what other treatments would I prescribe to my patients multiple times every day, knowing that 5 out of 6 people would fail? And then blame them when they do. So I retired from medicine. And now I spend all my time trying to help people think differently about why they eat. To get back to a place where they're eating instinctively. So it's not about being in control or out of control, but it's about being in charge. Because when you're eating instinctively to meet your body's needs, you can eat what you love. But you also are aware enough to love what you eat, to eat according to your body's needs. Now, I love this work because when you learn how to eat more mindfully, it helps you learn how to live more vibrantly. So we've been teaching workshops, mindful eating workshops now for 12 years. And in the little bit of time that we have left, I just want to leave you with just a couple of the key messages that we teach for people. And the first is going back to the why. When you know your why, everything else falls into place. If I'm eating because I'm sad, mad, glad, stressed, or bored, then I'm going to choose food or an amount of food for entertainment or comfort or distraction. If I'm eating to fuel my body so I have plenty of energy to do the things that I love, then I'm much more likely to eat instinctively. So how do you know when to eat? Well, remember, you were born with the instinctive ability to eat exactly what your body needs. But we've forgotten how to trust our body wisdom. So a simple way to do that is when you feel like eating, you pause. And you check in and you say, am I actually hungry? Am I hungry? Asking the question, am I hungry, allows you to tell the difference between wanting to eat and needing to eat. It's kind of like checking your fuel gauge before you pull into the gas station. And as my grandmother used to say, hunger is the best seasoning. Now, what do you eat? I say eat what you love. Eat what you love. Nutrition information should be a tool, not a weapon. When you deprive yourself of foods that you love, you will crave them more. So don't do that. Instead, just trust yourself, because when guilt is no longer a factor, common sense will prevail. Now, how do you eat? Eat with awareness and purpose. That means putting your fork down. Because if you are chewing one bite of food and putting the next bite of food in your mouth, which one are you going to be focused on? The next one. So when are you going to be done? When there's no more bites left to load. And ultimately, when we eat to fuel the vibrant life we crave, food doesn't have power over us anymore. We can eat what we love and love what we eat. Ultimately, eating is no longer punishment or deprivation or guilt. It's the way we fuel our body, mind, heart, and spirit. Thank you.